Here we are with Marija Bulat, Youth Participation and Reconciliation Specialist in our Frankly Speaking video series on youth participation. Let's start from the beginning. Marija, can you tell us a bit about yourself? So start with who is Marija?
You announced me as a youth participation and reconciliation specialist, even though that might be true, I prefer presenting myself in a more active status. So I would like to say that I'm an advocate for youth rights and youth participation for years now, and lately focused on the reconciliation in the Western Balkans region. If I should say something more about my background, I would say that I've been dealing with youth policy for more than 10 years now, and prior to that I was a young activist and a volunteer. My professional work started in youth organizations, and I was working as a project coordinator, program manager, and afterwards I became the Secretary General of the National Youth Council of Serbia. After 7 years in the National Youth Council, I've continued my career in RICO, which stands for Regional Youth Cooperation Office. And today I'm working for its local branch office in Serbia. Also, I've been doing a lot of training and consultancy work for young people, about young people, and with young people, which is probably something I like the most, this direct work with young people. My everyday work now is related to the regional cooperation of the young people in the Western Balkans. Since I work for this organization, which is actually established to bring young people of this region together through youth exchanges and other activities. It is an intergovernmental organization, which means that we are accountable to the governments of the Western Balkans 6 that founded RICO 4 years ago, and that are now giving their financial contributions for our work. But even more importantly, I would say that we are accountable to the young people of this region. Since we are talking about youth participation in this interview, I would like to emphasize that in RICO, we have actually 6 youth representatives in our governing board, and we're also accountable to them. It is the model of co-management that we actually adopted, something that was introduced by the Council of Europe years ago. And that's the model which involves young people in the decision making on an equal basis as the other decision makers. However, frankly speaking, the model itself is great in theory, but sometimes it can be problematic in practice if we don't implement it in the right way. That means that actually the co-management has its preconditions to be considered as a true model of youth participation, I would say. It's not only about providing young people with this opportunity, it's also about empowering them to use it in the right way. It's about choosing and selecting the right young people who have competencies to hold these positions, but also who are the authentic voice of their generation, who are recognized by their generation and actually got the legitimacy to act on behalf of young people. Young people who are ready to take over these responsibilities and to be vocal and sometimes even loud in performing these roles. But not only that, I would say that it's also about building capacities of the governmental representatives to grasp this concept of co-management and to respect the participation of young people, to treat them equally as other colleagues in those decision-making bodies, and rather than having this tokenistic approach, which is sometimes the case. So at least we are trying to do this in RICO when it comes to co-management. And maybe to go back on the mission of this regional cooperation and how do we deal with that? Well, we create opportunities for young people to do these regional youth exchanges and learning. We fund innovative exchange projects and initiatives led by civil society organizations and high schools mainly, but we also invest efforts in enabling, let's say, a positive and supportive social, political, legislative environment for young people to engage in mobility and exchange with each other across the Western Balkans. And I think that both are equally important, this exchange itself, but also the environment actually in which these exchanges are taking place. I would say something first on the Western Balkans. I would say that young people in the Western Balkans live under the influence of social and political narrative that is distorted by prejudice, by denial, by revisionism, by nationalism. And these inherited negative narratives actually form the attitudes of young people and their behaviors very often, and also form the basis of young people's future life choices about career, about their residence, friendships, relationships, and even the possibility of having a dialogue with other people in this region. And not small number of young people have decided actually to leave this region because they don't see that these narratives will change, or that the reality that creates these narratives will change, which is even worse. So dealing with reconciliation in the Western Balkans is actually about creating counter narratives, creating positive and alternative narratives to the existing and sometimes predominant ones, which are created by so-called political elites or media, or also by ordinary people. I mean, sometimes you can hear this from your parents or from your grandparents. So reconciliation is actually about looking from different perspectives and through different lenses on what has happened in the past in this region, and giving these new young generations an opportunity to discuss these topics openly in a safe environment and in a way they feel comfortable with. And when I say comfortable, I mean safe in the first place, since sometimes also they need to get out of this comfort zone and deal with these topics, because we all know that the process of learning is actually happening when we get out of the comfort zone. And in case of intercultural experiences, this direct exposure to something new or different or never experienced before is what truly contributes to the process of intercultural learning, and indirectly or maybe directly to the process of reconciliation. And this approach that we are taking is actually based on the main principles of youth participation, I would say, because it is about giving young people the opportunity to have a say on reconciliation. It is about actually letting them decide how they want to tackle these issues and to have a choice about it, and to design these activities, not only to participate in them. Because, you know, many of them were not even born, I mean, majority of them were not even born when these conflicts happened, or they were very young, but still they live now in the society which is still influenced by the past. So they have the right to shape their lives today and to shape this region today, and they have the right to try to build a better region for the future. And it goes, I think, the same also for the Europe, you know, not only for this region, but they have the right to shape this continent and the place they live in a way they feel right, you know. Also, we shouldn't neglect the fact that the young people are very diverse and heterogeneous group. So we cannot assume that, you know, all of them would like to deal with reconciliation in the same way. So some of them are ready to actually discuss these sensitive topics very openly, to visit memorials, to talk to the victims who survived the war. Some others prefer dealing with these topics through arts, for example, by making theater plays, exhibitions, documentary movies. While some others actually don't feel ready yet to openly discuss about the past, but are more than willing to, for example, meet their peers from the region, from different intercultural backgrounds, and to do some voluntary activities together, or to, I don't know, share practice on the entrepreneurship, or to play at a regional basketball tournament. And all these activities are actually intercultural activities, and this intercultural dialogue is inevitably taking place And this is essential for reconciliation. So it's not always straightforward, but it doesn't mean that it's not happening still. First of all, young people should be proactive in fighting for their rights, and they should join their efforts, because you know, one voice might be heard, but actually many voices that make a loud noise will be definitely heard. But it's not only about being loud, it's also about articulating needs, requests, interests. So young people have to be loud, but also vocal in fighting for the opportunity to be heard and to participate in decision making. And sometimes it takes time. Sometimes it's a long run, but the persistence and the clear goal on that road are actually crucial for the success. The establishment of the National Youth Council of Serbia, which I had the opportunity to be a part of at some, let's say, stage, lasted for more than 7 years. And methods and actions were changing over time, from, for example, small guerrilla actions to huge advocacy campaigns, from street performances to official meetings with the governmental representatives. Also, people who were leading those were changing over time, but there was always someone to ensure this continuity and to ensure that they're, you know, heading to the same goal which was set in the beginning. This is also important, I believe, that the doors are always open for new people to join, to bring in the new energy, to bring in new ideas. Because fighting for youth rights and youth participation, as I said, it's a long run, and I think it actually never stops. It's a constant struggle for a better position of young people in a society, and especially if you live in a society in which there are no systemic solutions for the problems of young people, and this is unfortunately the case in most of the countries of the Western Balkans, then you really have to invest, you know, constant efforts in actually fighting for the better position of young people. And always the new generations should serve to this goal, let's say. And even when young people manage to ensure this position, for example, in decision-making body and to practice youth participation, the struggle continues. Because young people, as any other, I would say, underrepresented group or underprivileged group or marginalized group, have this challenge not only to become part of decision-making processes, but also to maintain their position and to justify their position with competencies, with qualifications, with performance, because there is always this risk of, for example, generalization, you know, that if, for example, a young person who got an opportunity to be part of the, I don't know, city council or some governing board, if that young person who is actually representing one entire generation comes unprepared for that meeting or doesn't show up on that meeting without any particular explanation, it is very likely that some will say, oh, these young people, they're irresponsible, you know, or they're not mature enough to hold this position. So there is always this risk. And above that, as I already mentioned, there is this risk of tokenism when we talk about decision-making processes. So these youth representatives actually have to be prepared and have to understand that these risks might happen and to do their best to actually prevent them or to mitigate them, to demonstrate their skills, to demonstrate their knowledge, as well as attitude. Because if they come prepared, if they come on these meetings, for example, with facts, with information, with proposals, with this proactive approach, and with confidence, which is also important, that is actually changing this power disbalance that sometimes can happen in decision-making bodies. I know the cases in which actually young people demonstrate its dominance towards the other decision makers in the room and actually manage to influence those processes in their favor. And this is why I believe that the youth empowerment is actually key for successful youth participation today and also years ago, because strengthening the capacities of young people for critical thinking, for advocacy, for debating, for articulation of their interests, for networking, is actually the precondition for successful youth participation. All of this should be taught in schools and should be learned in families, but again, here in the Western Balkans, we don't really nurture this culture of critical thinking, and children and youth are more often taught to obey than to disobey, to follow than to lead, to nod with their heads rather than saying no or question something. And this brings us actually to the importance of civic sector and non-formal education that are bridging this gap and providing actually young people with opportunities to gain these skills and to practice them. I'm not young anymore, to be frank, at least according to the law. I would like to address to my generation and some older generations in the youth field and say that there is always something which we can do more to foster youth participation or political youth participation, and there will always be some new young generations fighting for their better position and in a need for support. And I really believe in this intergenerational dialogue, and I think it can be beneficial for everyone actually. But let's just not assume, because we have experience, that we know what do they need and how would they like to be supported, and let's always ask them. Maybe they need training, maybe they need mentoring from us, maybe they just need us to share good practices or contacts, and maybe they don't need us. Anyhow, let's always ask them first, let's respect their opinion, and after all, we want them to become more independent, more autonomous, more empowered. We want them to become active citizens and to take over the responsibility for their own lives, so let's support them in that process.